we should just get started. So I'm Victor and I are with Family Violence Project. We're the Domestic Violence Resource Center serving Kennebec and Somerset Counties. I'm a community educator. I've been there for about almost 10 years now. I started out at shelter and learned a lot from folks there and the work that we were doing and realized, you know what? We need to talk a lot more about domestic abuse. So we're really grateful that you're having us here today. And Victor, do you want to introduce yourself?
Sure. Hi, my name is Victor. I'm also a community educator. I have been with Family Violence Project for under a year, but really excited to be here and to be able to do this presentation for you.
Thank you, Victor, and welcome, Nicole. I just read your thing too, from being from Norwalk. Perfect. So you have folks all over Somerset County. That's really exciting. We really appreciate you all being here and taking the time for this. And we also want to say, we're going to talk about some hard things. So please do whatever you need for self-care. If you need to step away for a moment, whatever you need to do, because this can bring up a lot of intense feelings and emotions. We all either know someone or are someone who's experienced abuse. This affects all of us in many different ways. So please do what you need to do to take care of yourself. And also know that our helpline is there 24/7 for anyone. So if tonight, you're thinking about this and you need to talk it out with someone, know that you can call our helpline too. We're here for everyone. So we will jump right in. Feel free to put questions in the chat and participate in the chat that way, or whatever way makes the most sense for folks. Let's see. We'll be taking turns speaking, so we will each be moderating the chat while the other person is speaking.
All right, so the most logical place to start is, what is domestic abuse? You might have ideas, or a lot of us might have ideas of what domestic abuse or violence is based off of messages we got from our community or media, like TV shows and media, or movies is what I meant. But what domestic abuse is complex, and the first thing we want to start with is talking about that it is a pattern of coercive controlling behavior, which means that it's not isolated incidences and it's not just physical violence. Emotional abuse, financial abuse, spiritual and cultural, there are things that people can do to control others that doesn't just involve physically putting their hands on them. Domestic abuse is in the context of a current or former relationship. It is when one person uses intimidating, threatening, harmful, or harassing behavior designed to create fear in the victim, and that fear keeps someone under the control of whoever's perpetrating that violence. It is purposeful and chosen. These are not just outbursts or random things that people do, but it is systematic. And it is based on a belief system that the abusive person has the right to limit the human and civil rights of the victim. So for survivors and victims of domestic abuse, it is a system of control that does really limit their freedoms and limits what rights they have as humans. And that's a little bit what we'll be talking about today.
So we know that this affects so many people. It crosses all demographic lines, including race, age, ethnicity, religion, gender identity, sexual orientation, how much money people have, what their education level is. I think we sometimes have this picture of who someone is who's experiencing abuse. And I want us to sort of throw that away, because we know this could be anyone. It could be anyone who's experiencing it, and it could be anyone who's, being the abuser. We know that this is happening to 1 in 4 women, 1 in 7 men, and even more transgender folks. So this is happening to so many people. We know the majority of violence is men's violence against women, but we know that this affects anyone and everyone.
And to sort of extrapolate on those points, men can be the victims of domestic abuse at the hands of male, female, and non-binary partners. Women are sometimes abusive in heterosexual relationships, as well as in same-sex relationships or relationships with trans and non-binary people. Going back to what we said, yes, the statistics, most people in these situations, it is a woman being abused by a man, but we don't want to discount the experiences of men or transgender non-binary survivors. People who are transgender experience relationship abuse and sexual violence at disproportionately high rates when compared to those folks who are not transgender. And domestic violence resource centers, gets referred to as DVRCs a lot, offer services to people regardless of gender identity or sexual orientation. So we'll go over our list of what we do, what services we provide, but the majority of them will have a little asterisk in there, are available for anyone identifying it.
And so I don't know if folks have seen the power and control wheel. I don't know if you want to put in the chat or do a signal. You can use like a, one of those things to say if you have or not. But this wheel was created, in the early 80s by some women who were experiencing abuse, and they were sitting around a table, realizing that their partners all used pretty much the same tactics. So they created this wheel to show like the different ways that their partners were, abusive towards them. In the packet of materials that you were emailed by Brittany, you probably got a wheel that was non-gendered, because we also know that this happens to people, not just women. So this one is the original, so it does have that gendered nature, because that is who created this wheel. So if you take a moment and look at it, is there something that stands out to you? Is there something that you notice or observe about it? Or any thoughts? You can put any questions in the chat. And otherwise, I'll give you a moment to look, and then I'm going to point out a few things. We have a smaller group today, so if people do want to unmute and chat, you can do that too. So when I look at this, I think about the using isolation piece and how huge that is here in Maine. I think about Maine is so rural, and whether you're in Jackman or Cornville, or even if you're in Madison, if you don't have transportation, getting to the systems and getting, any place can be really hard. And that isolation is so huge. And if your partner is isolating you on top of the geographical isolation that you're already experiencing, that really, sets up this place where people aren't getting support they need. They're sort of losing touch with what's real because they may not have someone to like reflect on, like, hey, this really weird thing happened. What do you think of that? It really makes it so that people lose their footing. And isolation could be like them saying that their partner can't see a friend, or it could be like starting an argument before your mother's birthday party. So you feel like you have to stay home and take care of your partner instead of like seeing your family and having those relationships enhanced. Yeah, and Brittany says to her, using children as a form of control is one of the scariest things. That is such a huge one too, right? Like we hear that a lot of people saying, I want to stay home and to protect my children because I don't know what's going to happen if I leave my partner, what they would do, or they are the buffer, protecting their children. Or their partner may threaten, if you leave me, I'm going to call CPS. We hear all of these things. Some other things I like to point out, this is, there are many different tactics. It doesn't talk a lot about technology because this was made in the early 80s and a lot has changed since then, especially with technology. So there are so many ways technology can be used against folks as far as stalking or monitoring. We hear a lot about those. And then economic abuse, that is really built into a lot of pieces, making it so that people don't have very many resources financially. And that could be keeping someone from getting a job, or maybe sabotaging them, like throwing their keys in the woods. And so they are late to work or get fired or having a fight before work. So you go to work, upset, and, it affects all of those things. Using male privilege could be using stereotypes. So using stereotypes against folks, or using what they think, societal views of different things should be, and using that against people. Anything else stand out? And I just want to say it's all held together by the threat or reality of physical or sexual violence. So we work really closely with sexual assault crisis and support folks because we know that that's a reality for many people experiencing domestic abuse also.
And one thing we want to emphasize is that in the hands of an abuser, anything can be a weapon. So if you think about one of the spokes on the power and control wheel of coercion and threats, It might be the threat to out someone to their family or their workplace, knowing that they might get fired or may, have strife with their family. It can be destroying assistive devices like walkers or canes or hearing aids. Um, Using stereotypes against people to make them act in a certain way. Um, Denying medication, stigmas around mental health. This is something that someone is doing to control another person and keep them within their grasp, and abusers will do whatever it takes to achieve that. And so it's important to remember that people's identities and things that they really need can be turned against them by abusers.
Any thoughts or questions so far? I just want to say one more thing then. The power and control wheel, I don't know if folks have ever used this with a client or survivor. This can be very eye-opening for folks to see, because there may be things happening that people, it's really easy to excuse something, right? Be like, oh, they're just having a bad day. Oh, if I had just done this, this way, because it's minimizing, denying, and blaming, like their partner is really good at blaming them for the abuse. Like saying, if you had just done it this way, if, you wouldn't do this and I wouldn't have to do this. All of these things really work together to make someone feel pretty trapped. And so like seeing it all together on one page can be really like eye-opening to folks. So this is a great tool to have, on the wall, have handy, just in case, because it can be really a real eye-opener for folks. And so we want to shift gears a little to look at it's really easy to think everyone just needs to leave, they just need to leave to be safe. So we're going to take a moment, this is called a risk analysis, to look at that stay versus leave, the risks that people face while staying and then after they leave, because I think we often see like, oh, if they just leave, everything will be fine. But we want to really challenge the thinking around that. So let's start with stay, and you can put these in the chat. What risks, or unmute yourself because it is a smaller group, what risks do people face if they stay in a relationship with an abusive partner? What may happen to folks? I know people might be eating lunch, so let's see, they might be isolated. Yep, that's a huge one, right? Like their partner may be keeping them from working, from seeing friends and family. That definitely happens. Yeah, physical or mental harm, that definitely happens when people are experiencing abuse. Yeah. There's the risk of them being killed. I think that's what we're all worried about too. That folks will be injured, that they'll lose their job, that the kids are going to experience abuse directly, or that they're witnessing it and it's affecting them. And CPS may be involved and they could lose their children. This affects people mentally, so they could develop depression, PTSD, anxiety. It could affect their self-esteem, lose their sense of self. We know that this, can create poverty because their partner is, probably, likely, not every time, but we do hear of it, like 99% of cases, the statistic that their partner is controlling the finances or being financially abusive in some way. Illness, like when we think about chronic stress and what that does to the body, those constant migraines, gastrointestinal upset, chronic pain from all the stress, and then also injuries that might happen. Substance use, we know that people sometimes do things to cope to get through the day, and substance use might be what's keeping them moving forward. And then suicide, we know that is an option that may feel like the only option rather that people have to escape the abuse, which is really hard to hear and hard to acknowledge, but is definitely a reality that people face. So let's switch and think to what are some risks that people face when they leave a partner who's abusive. What do you think some of the risks are when they leave? Let's see, and Brittany says many of the same. Yeah. Blackmail, yep. Yeah. Do you want to say something else about that blackmail? Do you have like an example of what that could look like? And that might be a lot to type. So I can also like give examples like maybe holding images over their head if they had private images that were sent to them, threatening to call DHHS. If you leave, I'll tell people you, yes, X, Y, or Z. And social media has a big part to play in that too, right? Because that like makes things go like wildfire. They may lose their place to live, disapproval from family and friends. Yeah, all of those things. And all of the above, like Brittany said, stalking, yes, that's a huge one, right? Because we know that at least when they were with their partner, they knew where they were. Now that they're gone, they may constantly be looking over their shoulder because their partner, who may have been stalking them already, has all these things in place now. They know their schedule, they know all of their things. They may be logged into their devices and able to, have all these things in place to monitor. So yeah, all of those things, including all of these, right? There's still a risk of being killed, still a risk of being injured, losing their jobs. All of these risks carry over. So what have we seen that leaving has done to the risks they faced? It looks like those risks are still there, and then there are even more, because we know that when people leave, that is the most dangerous time for them. 75% of homicides happen when people have been are just about to leave or have just left their partner, and up to a year after that. Like, leaving is the most dangerous time. We also know, like, maybe they might become homeless now, and that comes with it all kinds of other risks and losses that they face. And we know leaving doesn't, all in all, get rid of these other things. Those things carry over, including the stalking, including the fear, including the control and the way they're able to use the children still, all of those things. And so this isn't to say that people shouldn't leave or don't leave, because I'm sure we all know someone who's left an abusive partner. But it's just to say we need to get rid of that statement of why don't they just leave? Because now we know that leaving in and of itself does not create safety. And with that too, like, by saying you need to leave, it's also saying that you staying is at the root of this, not your partner's abusive behavior. This is really, a paradigm shift that we need to understand too. We also make it sound like leaving is really easy, like, putting in your notice at your apartment and moving out, when we know abusers will do all kinds of things to keep control over their partner. And as someone resists and tries to, create their own space, their partner, I feel like it's a fist that they squeeze tighter and tighter. So things may escalate because of them trying to leave. And so again, this isn't to say that people shouldn't leave or don't, but now with getting rid of that question, we can support people by helping them with safety planning. So what do they need to do to be safe, whether they're staying or leaving? How can we as community members help them? What do people need? So you can put in the chat some ideas of like what people may do for safety planning, whether they're staying or leaving. What are some things do you think? A place to go? Yeah, that might be one. And I'll let you all keep thinking, but for time's sake, I'm just going to power on and throw some up here. Having a support system, being able to reach out to family. Yeah. And looks like that was put in there, surround themselves with people that will help. That's huge, right? Being able to talk to people about what's going on, breaking that isolation, maybe calling the helpline, calling Family Violence Project, maybe squirreling away money or documents, maybe getting a protective order, and what works for one person may not work for someone else. We can't say, well, you need to get this, or this is a one size fits all. This is a very individual thing. And so really supporting people and what do you need to be safe? How can I support you? And knowing that we as individuals, as community members, as providers, we can't provide all of these things ourselves. So we need all of us to be part of this to support people, because we know it takes all of us for that support.
Bring up the rest of the thing. Okay, there we go. So we hear a lot in this, right? Like excuses that either the abusive partner makes for themselves, that survivors might make for the abusive partner, or that people on the outside. And those sort of excuses, coupled with the very real threats that we just saw, make leaving or altering the situations and safety within the relationship really hard. So we're going to talk about this. And if there's any excuses that aren't on this list that you might have heard before, or anything that you want to bring up, feel free to leave it in the chat. So people might blame abusive and violent behavior on alcohol and drugs, like, you know, how he gets when he drinks, or, you know, if you weren't using, I wouldn't have to be this way. Something to that effect. No one deserves to have violence. No one deserves to be the receiver of violence for their own substance use, and substance use also is not an excuse to perpetrate violence. Mental illness, that's sort of the same thing. Of, you know, they're struggling, they're not on meds, or maybe you're not on meds, and so this is your fault. When it's not an excuse for this. Mutual abuse, people say that a lot, like they get rough with each other. We know that in a lot of these situations where there is mutual abuse, it is the abusive person enacting violence and the survivor trying to resist by using violence of their own. And so it might be two people who are being physically resistive to each other, but there is one person in that situation that has the upper hand, that is maintaining the control. So it's not an equal fight. The victim likes it or attracted to that kind of person. It's not true. The really big thing to consider is that abusers do not start relationships as being abusive. There's often a honeymoon phase where they're really sweet and charming and buy gifts and say nice things and go out of their way. And then once there's a significant level of entanglement, things take a turn. The abuser had a bad childhood. Maybe they have been abused themselves, whether that was by past partners, parents, guardians, other family. It's still not an excuse to abuse someone else. Anger is a really, really big one. And sometimes people think the solution for an abuser's violence might just be anger management. Anger is not a excuse for violence whatsoever. It also makes it seem like these are isolated incidents, like they only do when they're angry. And if you just need to make them angry, being angry is an excuse to hurt someone. And funnily enough, abusers can be so angry and in that moment and charged, and the police gets called and they're calm and totally back on track. So we know that's not an excuse. And then stress, low self-esteem, poor communication skills, lack of conflict resolution strategies, like they just don't know how to handle it. They, you know, they would be lost if you left, et cetera, et cetera. You know, all these excuses are not valid whatsoever. There is no justification for abuse, and no one deserves to have that violence put upon them, even if they're mentally ill, even if they're using substances, like no one. And so we just want to be clear about that and really try to not make these excuses for people, because we know abusers are doing this in a very systematic, thought out way. And that's a really good.
Oh, go ahead. Sorry.
And I just wanted to point out in the chat, like, surround themselves with people that will help. It's, yeah, they're the sort of boys club we hear a lot. You know, if you're in that culture, or it's, yeah, just because someone did it to you, or like someone else is doing it in the community, that doesn't justify it for someone else.
Okay. So working with someone who's impacted by abuse, you know, we really encourage you to be patient, you know, listen to them. You might be the first person they tell, and the floodgates may open, you know, and so being able to listen and validate the feelings, what they're feeling, what they're going through, you know, believe and support them. And this can, you know, it can be a lot sometimes. So do what you need to do to take care of yourself also. It's okay to voice concern for safety. If you're hearing something that's, you know, alarming, you know, it's okay to say, I'm really worried about your safety. You know, what do you need for support? Support their decisions, you know, like you may see the only way is they need to leave, but that might not be an option for them. They know their abuser better than, you know, than we do. They are doing, like I assure you, people are working really hard to keep themselves safe in that situation. And, you know, their partner may have said, if you leave XYZ, and those are very real threats. And so, you know, being able to support their decisions, support them, really focus on them and what they need to be safe and on how they're feeling and building up their strengths, because we know that their partner is tearing them down. And it may be easy to feel like you need to demonize that partner or say like, oh, I can't believe they're doing this to you. But they might then go to like, you know, come to the rescue for that partner when we really want to focus on them and what they need to be safe. How do they feel with their partner? Like really focusing on them and how they feel can be really important for this. Ask what they need for support, you know, refer them to Family Violence Project, please. If you need any materials, we can bring some out to you, and take care of yourself. You know, this can be really hard on the heart. And so if you need to call for support, please do that. And if you're doing this in a helping capacity through your work, also, you know, seek supervision from your support staff as well.
And then our services. So we do have a 24-hour helpline. It is not just for survivors, and it's not just for survivors in active crisis. If you're working with a patient, or, you know, even later today, you have questions or just want to talk through some things that you may have felt during this presentation, we're there. We do have emergency shelters, court advocates who can help people with protection from abuse orders and explain things more on the civil legal side. We do have a liaison to Child Protective Services who can help individuals, survivors who have cases open in District 5, which is Kennebec and Somerset. We do one-to-one advocacy with folks, support and education groups, supportive housing and services for folks who are getting back on their feet after they've left their partner, school-based education, K through 12, specialized training and consultation. And this is where this little asterisk came in that I mentioned before, our certified domestic violence intervention class called Change Work. That is a male identifying only program, but everything up on this list is open for anyone. So, you know, there is no expectation for support groups to be women only. So all survivors, any survivors of any identity can reach out to us. And all of our services are free and confidential for survivors. And you know what, we're at 12:30, but I just want to point out this map really quick, which is other services in the state. You can find this at mcedv.org, which is the main coalition to end domestic violence. There's a lot of partner programs throughout the state. And so, you know, if you have folks that are coming in from bordering counties, you know, you can check out these other great programs and refer them there. There's also the Wabanaki Women's Coalition, which has domestic and sexual violence advocacy centers throughout the state that do exist for Wabanaki people. And then we will be staying on the line. I realize that probably need to go back to work, but if anyone has any questions, feel free to stay. Otherwise, you can shoot us an email anytime.
And I put a link to a evaluation, because of course, what would a presentation be without an evaluation? So if you have a moment to click that before you go out so you can fill it out on your way out, we'd appreciate it. But yeah, we are here. If you have any questions, that was like the fastest half hour of my life. I don't know about you all.
Thank you so much for sticking with us. This is normally a longer presentation, but we had to condense it. So
Oh, awesome. Thank you, Brittany. The recording will stop so folks can ask questions and that part won't be recorded. We appreciate that.